I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Movie Star Magic. And this week we're going to be looking at one of the greatest, if not the greatest actor of all time, Al Pacino. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is talk about a movie star. Sometimes they're a great actor, sometimes they're just a great movie star, but talk about them, break down their career, and talk about why they are great. What is that defining feature that makes them great? What is their movie star magic? And the structure of the show just works in the sense that the first two-thirds of the video, I talk about the career arc of the actor, breaking down their career into three different distinct chapters, talking about a defining role in that chapter to sort of help you understand the context of how I'm sort of classifying their career, how their careers change, how their acting styles change, the different types of projects that they sort of have evolved to. But then ultimately in that last third, talking about their defining feature, the thing that even since the beginning of their actor, that unique thing that they're able to have that makes them so relatable, that makes them someone that can lead a movie that people want to go and see. What is their movie star magic? And just jumping right into it, because this should be a long one, at chapter 1, I'm going to call The Method. And this is so tied to Al Pacino because he is sort of seen as one of the very early method actors. And in many ways, he really changed acting because he's a guy who I think is a movie star, but I think is a great actor first. And that there's sometimes great actors, but there's not always movie stars. And then there's sometimes movie stars that aren't always great actors, but then there's the rare combination that does happen when we get to someone like an Al Pacino, who can be a movie star, who can have his sort of unique elements that people want to go see, but then also be a great actor and impress us anyways. But going back to The Method, he is a guy who, inspired by Marlon Brando, a lot of people his age, his generation, Dustin Hoffman, guys like that, adopted the sort of style that he learned from Stella Adler, who learned it from Stanislavski. Al Pacino learned it from Lee Strasberg, but sort of Stella Adler or Lee Strasberg in the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s helped shape a new generation of actors and their approach to acting, particularly film acting, which is this idea of the method of method acting, which involves doing an intense amount of homework on characters, understanding the interior lives of these people way beyond what the role and the movie even entails, before what you would even see on screen. Of course, it also means staying in character in between the takes, really trying to transform and become that actor. I think Al Pacino is the sort of clearest example of the success story of that, where Brando was sort of the earliest one on doing that, but clearly had, a lot of attitude issues and was so unpredictable, whereas Pacino was sort of the great young actor who did a lot of great young parts. And, his roles in The Godfather, The Godfather is seen as one of the greatest movies of all time, both 1 and 2, and his performance in them are seen as some of the greatest of all time. So, his sort of early run here of Panic in Needle Park, then The Godfather, then Scarecrow, then Serpico, then The Godfather 2, and then Dog Day Afternoon. That's his IMDb for a 5-year run there. It's incredible. And then even if you want to go into Injustice for All and his 80s movies. And really, I'd probably stop this period at 82 with Arthur before, it goes into Scarface and that sort of era. But he is, I think, within this era, known, of course, for doing that method acting, but then what that method acting ultimately brings is a varying type of role. So when we talk about Serpico or we talk about Dog Day Afternoon, they're very different. I mean, he can be very sensitive, and he's a transformative actor in this role, not necessarily in the modern day sense of the transformative, being, putting on makeup and doing different types of roles, but being truly transformative and playing different types of people in different types of roles. He can be calm and reserved in The Godfathers. He can be even reserved in something in Cruising, or sensitive in Dog Day Afternoon, or neurotic in Serpico, or conscientious and Justice for All. He sort of does it all in these sort of earlier periods and transforms whatever the character needs and totally commits to that and works very well. He can be charismatic in Scarecrow and funny, or very charismatic in Panic in Needle Park. He can do it all in this early period. He just shows his range right away, which is pretty incredible. But when I'm talking about his defining role, I have to go with The Godfather Part 2. The fact that he didn't win an Oscar for this is one of the great Oscar travesties. And just the fact that, even though I think I like The Godfather 1 a little bit better, I think it's almost undeniable that his performance in The Godfather Part 2 is probably the better performance. I don't want to talk about too much about the movie because what is there to say? I just want to say that it's incredible that Al Pacino, in the second movie, where he's very much the lead of this movie, where in the first one, I think it's still more of an ensemble movie, but in the second one, where he really is sort of lead, where he is this sort of Shakespearean kind of a character who's taking on the father's mantle and the family's mantle and wants to push into a new era, but is also struggling with his family and betrayal. And it's a classic sort of Shakespearean tale, and just the fact that Al Pacino has been able to make one of the most sociopathic, insane kind of characters, how to make him one of the most relatable characters ever, to make him one of the most iconic characters in movie history, is just an incredible task and such a feat that shouldn't be forgotten. So that's Godfather 2, but the second chapter, which I would sort of define as 83 to, let's say, 2003, 2002, I would say is this period where I define it as the tragic hero. Now, he has a sort of weird gap where from 83 to 89 he only does one movie. He does sort of soft retirement and then comes back to it. And there is a shift between sort of early Pacino and middle-aged Pacino, where ever since he does Scarface and that sort of intense, accent-driven, kind of over-the-top, very intense kind of a movie, he starts to do and take a lot of that sort of Tony Montana energy and puts into a lot of his roles. So a lot of his roles afterwards allow him to be a little bit more over the top, much more intense. But for a lot of people, it's like there's young Pacino and then there's early Pacino, and this sort of clear, lazy divide is young Pacino is sort of reserved and quiet, and later Pacino is like big and over the top, which is not true. I do want to dispel that, because if you look at movies like I did and did a deep dive on his movies, you look at Injustice for All, and you look at even something like Panic at Neil Park or Dog Day Afternoon, he has major freakouts, major over-the-top screaming, yelling outbursts in those movies in the 70s. He's just doing it again in the 90s. He does, I do think there is a divide. I do think he does a little bit more and relies on that more and becomes, frankly, more of a movie star in the 90s, because he's doing less transformative roles and being a little bit more of an Al Pacino type in many of his movies. That being said, I think that just to say he was doing an Al Pacino type really discredits a lot of his great 90s runs, and that's why I call this period the tragic hero, because when I look at his movies, Scent of a Woman, a cynical, disenfranchised war veteran, or you'd look at Insomnia, sort of a down-and-out detective, or Heat, is a cop that can't catch a break, that his family life is falling apart, and he doesn't have any friends, and he's so obsessed with his job. I mean, like, the already sort of hero types, but they're kind of tragic hero types. They're not always going to sort of be perfect and win in the end. There's something dark and cynical about his sort of worldview during this period. And if he's not doing that, he's doing something like Devil's Advocate, where he's literally playing Satan. So he's really approaching these sort of, that's why I call it the tragic hero, because even for the hero he loses, it is sort of this sort of almost 70s-esque cynical kind of approach to storytelling that he was so known for in the 70s, that he actually does continue into the 90s, although the movies do change a bit. Then when talking about a defining role for this movie, it was so hard just to pick one, because when you're talking about Carlito's Way or Scarface or Insomnia, I mean, these are some of my favorite movies of all time. I think Carlito's Way is just a classic Al Pacino performance. But when I'm talking about a defining role of this period, I want to ultimately go with Heat, which I think, is talked about a whole lot, but there's still so much more to talk about that movie. And he plays Vincent Hanna, a sort of typical job-obsessed, hunting down, abrasive cop, almost sort of leaning into the sort of traditional, stereotypical cop role, leaning into it so much that it becomes new again in his sort of intense obsession with catching criminals and doing his job, despite his sort of varying personal life, we'll say. And what's so great about this movie is that he has these over-the-top moments, he has these big speeches, but he also has all those other mouth elements too, that it really is sort of a great ranging performance to him, because he is this sort of secretly coked up cop that has these sort of great intense speeches of "give me all you got" in these interrogation scenes, but then also, you forget about sort of these sort of coy, slyness with some of the sort of relationships he has with Robert De Niro's character, Neil McCauley, and sort of the intensity and calmness that he actually does bring to their sort of interactions. And then also, of course, you have sort of the tired element, what he talks about in his social life, that he is doing sort of these speeches, but they're sort of half-assed. There's sort of him when he just wants to relax and be a safe space, but then has to deal with all this personal family stuff. So he does all these sort of varied elements within the movie and really shows off his acting range within Heat, which I think is an underrated element of it. But it's also, of course, indicative of this late period of Al Pacino, because he is this tragic guy. When we see the end of the movie, which I don't want to spoil in case you haven't seen it, he is a man who is sort of lost. He is a man who has achieved his goal, sort of, but he doesn't know what he's going to do the next day. That's sort of every Michael Mann movie, where it's like, man, I can't. The next day, the hero may have achieved the task, but they are broken because of it. So he's really great at that. But then also, when we talk about the sort of machinations of the movie, what Pacino is bringing to it, I think, is actually adding a lot of the momentum to the movie. His over-the-top, intense pace is a perfect counterbalance to the calm pace of Neil McCauley and Robert De Niro's character. If Al Pacino was also calm, frankly, a 2-hour and 45-minute action thriller would be very thrilling. And many of the scenes that allow the movie to keep up its pace so that it's entertaining for the whole 2 hours and 45-minute length is because of Pacino. Because we have the calm scenes with Neil McCauley and Robert De Niro. But then when we get to Pacino's perspective and we see his storyline, it's always go, go, go. There's always something going on. And his ability to sort of match that pace of the movie is so integral to keeping the energy of that movie going. So it's like, yes, it's using his over-the-top kind of intense movie star persona that he's able to establish. But then he's doing so in order to service the film. So then it's like, well, he's not doing it in the sense that he's just doing it for fun, that he's just this loose cannon, that he really is being utilized in the best way possible by Michael Mann, while also showing off his acting skill. It really is just, Heat's one of my all-time favorite movies, and he's so terrific in it, and I would have hated myself if I didn't talk about it. So there you go, Heat, classic role there for Chapter 2. Then in Chapter 3, I'm going to call this period the complicated man, because after sort of Insomnia, he starts to do sort of questionable movies, The Recruit, Geely, Two for the Money, Jack and Jill, Righteous Kill, and you're going like, what are you doing? Why is he doing a Dunkin' Donuts commercial and Jack and Jill, 3% Rotten Tomatoes Adam Sandler movie, like one of the worst of all time? Like, what is he doing? This is Al Pacino, one of the greatest actors of all time. What is he doing in these terrible VOD kind of level movies? And then he starts to sort of make really interesting roles that even if the movie isn't interesting, he's always taking interesting roles. So you see movies like You Don't Know Jack, playing Jack Kevorkian, or he's doing Manglehorn or Danny Collins. These sort of very fascinating, weird, off-ball roles that he hasn't really played before. And then that starts to get them in the more good graces of Scorsese. He does Irishman and Tarantino, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and then Ridley Scott, House of Gucci, doing Prestige TV. And it's like, now he's back in the big leagues. Now he's back in the studios. And guess what? He hasn't lost any of it. He's still terrific. He's still great. And now we're in this period where I do think that he's, only have, so many years left, but he is sort of back into the major studio kind of good graces, and did that by playing complicated men. And even still, in this sort of later period, he is playing, oftentimes, real-life people doing real-life sort of true stories of complicated men, of men that we're not exactly sure how to feel about. Was Jack Kevorkian, You Don't Know Jack, a sadist? Did he enjoy killing these people, or was he actually doing it from a sense of empathy? Joe Paterno, how much does he know about, the Sandusky stuff? Is he sort of willfully hiding things? And then, of course, the classic example being Jimmy Hoffa in The Irishman, which is my defining role for this period. I thought this movie would never happen. I can't believe it actually did happen, and it was as good as it was. Scorsese, De Niro re-teaming, and then De Niro and Pacino re-teaming for a Scorsese movie in a sort of a later mob recollection of death kind of movie. It was like, this is a dream, and then it comes out, and it's terrific. And of course, he plays Jimmy Hoffa, the sort of complicated figure who had shady ties with the mob, but it was also integral of establishing the American Union and understanding how we understand sort of labor economics and the workforce in North America today. He helped establish that, a lot of that, and he was a pioneer in that regard. But he was a complicated man because he had these ties with the mob, because he was a man who was very sort of boisterous and went to jail and was so passionate. So you understand within the movie that you understand why Robert De Niro's character Frank Sheeran appreciates him, because he's the man full of passion and full of ideals and full of morals, but he stands by that. So you appreciate that, and you understand why Frank likes him so much. But then you also understand why he's sort of a thorn in the side of the mob, which is also part of Frank's life. So he plays this interesting duality and complicated man within the history of true life, but also within the central conceit of the movie being the life of Frank Sheeran. And he's almost playing sort of like a Joe Pesci type, opposite to Joe Pesci, as a sort of hothead who can't keep his mouth shut, who will just say a bunch of things and gets people into trouble, but is a man of ideals. So there is sort of like a sensitivity, especially when we have these sort of one-on-one relationships in hotel rooms between Hoffa and Sheeran. But then also we have these sort of over-the-top great speeches, and he does sort of transform and allows them to be funny and these sort of comedic situations as well. And I think it's just a perfect late period performance for him, because it represents Al Pacino, the man, that allows him to be big and over the top and have these great speeches and be funny, and that you just want to stand up and clap and clap for him. But then also shows the sort of toll that this life can have on someone. They get beaten down and they want to hold on to something that they don't necessarily have, and there's a complexity there as well. So it is sort of a great Al Pacino performance as well, because he's still got that passion, but maybe it's showing a little bit more. It's a little bit aged, it's a little bit more weathered. It doesn't always have the sort of vivacity to back that up, and how you sort of reflect that, and how do you sort of interact with that and come to terms with that. It's kind of a lot of the themes of the movie, I think, is also sort of representative here of Al's career as well. So I do think it'll be sort of a late great legacy kind of a role. And he won in '92 with Scent of a Woman, and then he wasn't nominated until The Irishman. So I do think it is sort of seen that way, and will be seen in that way. Although who knows, we could get another great performance from him. And even something like House of Gucci, he was a Connors nominee last year, so don't count him out. He's still delivering great performances every year. And now, talking about the defining feature of Al Pacino, I'm calling this video Al Pacino the tone setter, because some actors are really great at matching other people's tones. Some people are great at coming into a scene and being like, hey, you're doing this, I can match that. I can sort of match the vibe and atmosphere and tone of the movie. But Al Pacino's not really like that. Al Pacino is the setter. He sets the tone. He's the guy that sort of takes the lead that other actors go around. He's the guy that, if you can use him, he's the sort of canon that if you can use him properly, he'll be a great act, but you also have to sort of control him. He's going to do his own thing, and you have to work within him to make the movie work with him. And that works in both ways, because it also allows us as an audience to be drawn to him. He has this sort of magnetic kind of quality. He sets the tone for his other actors, for the movie, but then also for us, which is why we're so compelled, interested to become interested in his interior life and whatever role he's doing. And the classic scene of this is in The Godfather, in which we literally see the camera start to sort of switch into his side, and we see him gain control and power in the scene that they're planning to kill Sollozzo and McCluskey, where sort of the power shifts away from James Caan, Sonny, and Tom, and more towards Michael and his role. Even though he's sitting down, he controls so much of that scene. He gets the sort of magnetic energy and literally draws the camera into him, and how they change the camera angles, and that's just masterclass of filmmaking. But also, I think, in how Pacino's able to draw us in to say, no, there's a shift in power here. Actually, I'm going to take control. Actually, this is my idea. This is my plan. My father is on his deathbed, and I'm going to take over. And that's his superpower, his ability to just control the scene. And that sort of outburst that he has, whether it be in Dog Day Afternoon, Attica, or it's in Son of a Woman, where that last speech everyone gets up and claps from just because it's such a terrific speech. These sort of great moments of outbursts contrast with the sort of reserved moments is his superpower. He can be a jolt of energy. Certain actors, they're quiet, they're reserved, and you want to lean into and sort of get into the movie and hear what they're trying to say. But some actors like Al Pacino, you're blown away. And that's no one way to do things. Not one is better than the other. But when you watch an Al Pacino movie, he reels you in, and something like The Insider. Then he's going to have a big speech, and then he's going to blow you back and remember who he is. And I love doing it. I love doing the sort of Al Pacino hoo-ah impressions. He's fun in that sense. He's very funny. He's very charismatic. Go back to Panic in Needle Park. You'll see that right away. Even something like Devil's Advocate, he's so charming, so charismatic. And Scarface too, I think, as well. There's an element of that too. But when talking about his movie star quality, it is that outburst. It's his ability to control a scene, to grab you by the throat and hold you there and hold you in suspense without breathing because of his virtuosity in his acting. Like I mentioned at the top of the video, he's a great movie star because of his Al Pacino-isms and the way he says things and the weird delivery of his dialogue and the classic outbursts that you're going to get and big hoo-ah loud speech that you're going to get in every one of Al Pacino's movies. But he's also a great actor because he knows how to control that, and he knows how to set the tone for the movie. That this is what he's bringing. Everyone tries to accommodate around that, but guess what? What he's bringing is so powerful that you want to accommodate around that. That's the difference between him and being, another sort of selfish, oddball kind of actor that's in their own movie. He wants to make the movie the best he can be, but he's also bringing his great style of acting and persona, which is why, in a movie like Any Given Sunday, he works so great as a coach because he's giving these great speeches and you feel riled up. Or even another example that doesn't allow him to do outbursts, Insomnia, I think is another great performance. So much of the reason why that movie feels foggy and slow and misty and tired is because of Pacino's performance, because he just wants to sleep and he can't, and the way he sort of drags himself through scenes adds so much to the overall tone of that movie and why that movie is successful. So he's worked with so many great directors. He's one of the greatest actors of all time. He's consistently putting out great movies and great roles. I was maybe counting him out in the Jack and Jill era. Then he comes back with Irishman and Once Upon a Time and House of Gucci, and it's like, oh hey, you're back. You're still a great actor. You reminded everyone that you can still do it. And what else is there to say aside from the fact that I just love him as an actor? I love watching all his movies. If you haven't seen an Al Pacino movie in a while, definitely check one out. You will not regret it. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on Al Pacino, his movies. What's your favorite Al Pacino movie? I haven't even talked about Carlito's Way or Scarface or so many other. Any Given Sunday, I barely mentioned. So many great performances that he's done. Dog Day Afternoon. I mean, there's so much great movies to talk about in so little time. But those are the movies I ultimately chose. Let me know in the comments down below. Maybe an underrated Al Pacino movie. That could be a good one. But that's about it. Until next time. Stay tuned.